I want to welcome everybody to this very special conversation with Brian. Tonight's guest, two co-authors who have written an amazing new book, Navigating the Unexpected. The first author, a great friend of mine, Geri Parscale. Geri has worked in education for over 37 years. She has worked as a classroom teacher, principal, professional development director, and finally, deputy superintendent of Fort Leavenworth Schools, USD 207. Her mode for operation was always the same, learning for all kids. Her co-author, who I am just meeting tonight for the first time, although I've heard a lot of great things about her, Darcy Kraus, is an independent educational consultant with over 37 years of experience as well. Specializing in building and district level leadership, she serves as an adjunct professor for graduate leadership studies at Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas, and as an undergraduate lecturer at the University of Kansas. We're going to learn a lot more about Darcy and Geri in the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome to a conversation with Brian, Darcy Kraus, and Geri Parscale. I am so excited. Geri and Darcy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Excited for the opportunity and appreciate it.
You know, at the beginning of each one of my shows, I ask my guests to talk a little bit about their personal story, their professional journey, so my audience gets a chance to know them a little bit better. And so, who is Geri Parscale and Darcy Kraus?
Who is Geri? My name's Geri. I live in the glorious state of Kansas. I have been in education now for going on 38 years, I think. I have been a teacher. I have been a principal at various levels. I have been a director of professional development. And then I ended my on-site career as the deputy superintendent at Fort Leavenworth Schools in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And it was during that period that I had the privilege of being able to hear Dr. Rick DeFore speak one summer and just bought into everything that he was selling and learned a little bit more about professional learning communities. And there were actually 3 of us at that time who had gone to that workshop, that institute. And I took a chance and took the plunge, and we started living as a PLC at one of the schools at Fort Leavenworth, where I was principal at that time, and then went on to really, make some great things happen for kids. And I have been consulting with Solution Tree going on 18 years now. So that's my full-time gig right now. So.
And you've been crisscrossing the country. You've been all over the place these last couple.
Yeah, I have. This has been a busy past couple of years. So spend a lot of time in a lot of places, meet a lot of hardworking educators, and just love it. I'm blessed.
So Darcy, tell me a little bit about you, and then we're going to get to know both of you throughout this 45 minutes to an hour. But tell me a little bit about your personal or professional journey.
Yeah. Well, golly, I was just counting up. I think this is my 38th year in education, most of which was spent in the classroom as a teacher, spectrum of grades. Then I had the opportunity to move into some other specialty roles, reading interventionist, learning coach, those type of things. Encouraged by some individuals and moved into leadership, and I have been there ever since. I had the great opportunity to be the principal of a wonderful school, Sunset Hill, Go Eagles, and that's where I met Geri, and then retired as the elementary director for Lawrence Public Schools in 2021. And since then, I have, oh golly, I have been blessed with a kaleidoscope of opportunities. As an educational consultant, I still get to teach, but I get to teach adults. I wrote the book with Geri, and I work a lot in districts with district leaders and building leaders, helping them amplify their processes and auditing their systems, and then just helping them reach their goals. Probably my favorite role right now is I'm a new grandma,
Oh, wow.
and
Congratulations. Hey.
I know, and I thought my son and sweet daughter-in-law were the cat's meow, but then came little Nugget. And so everything in my schedule is crafted around spending time with my family. So.
Yeah. Well, good for you too. You know, one of the things I really like when I have this conversation is that the connections that I have with educators, because I'm an educator. I've been in education for, 35 plus years as well. And the heart you have for kids, but also the heart you have for the adults, because as we know, as the adults go, the kids go too. And I think that's a good segue into your book, Navigating the Unexpected. Let's talk about, what inspired this book. Geri, we know, and Darcy, we all know the story. I did do, but not my audience may not. But if you look over my shoulder, beside
I
your book
see it.
is Nick's book. And so, you know, I don't want to start tearing up, but I think, you know, his book started it. And then, what you're doing is really turning a really tough situation into an opportunity to help people around the world. And so can you tell us a little bit about the what inspired the creation of the book and kind of all the above?
Sure, sure. So I'll start. So in 2016, my youngest son, Nicholas, was diagnosed with a pineoblastoma, which is a brain tumor. In his case, it was inoperable. And that happened in between his third and fourth grade year. And it just so happened that Darcy and I had a meeting on the books for, I think it was a few days later, a week later, because Nicholas had been at Sunset Hill since he was a second grader.
Right.
And we had a meeting on the books just to talk about his placement and to talk about him and his needs and all of that.
Sure.
And when he was diagnosed on July 9th, um, she was one of the first calls I made simply to reschedule the meeting.
Right.
And it just kind of went from there. So Darcy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, I hope I do this justice
You
because
will.
there's so many emotions involved. Obviously, I had the privilege of being Nicholas's principal, but I would say it's the blessing of being Geri's friend, and we walked this journey lockstep together. And as reflective practitioners, just our conversations organically during that time, but more so after, just gravitated to the things that we did, the things that we could have done better, and by we, I mean me, and the things that went good.
Darcy, I'm sorry, when you say me, do you mean the school, like you as the leader, but you, the school, in terms of being prepared?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I one of the impetuses behind this book was recognizing that this is one of those things that we don't ever think is going to happen to us,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so we prepare, and I'm a systems girl. I have systems for everything. And I even kind of make light of that in the book. Um, but what I recognized is that we didn't have the systems that could support us in the extended journey and the different twists and turns that this took, and
Sure.
the impact, because we were a school family, that it had on everyone.
Yeah.
So fast forward, as Geri and I continued to visit,
Mhm.
uh, we found that we kind of, through the nuggets of our conversation, had informally created a comprehensive system that would support schools in doing just this, and hopefully doing it in a way that made them feel confident and empowered and prepared.
You know, Brian, and I'm going to add to that, and it was a journey. I think that any child that is experiencing trauma goes through a journey, and I often, as a parent, thought of it as an iceberg. So you see the top, right, and you see so little of it, and you see what's going on, but there's so much more underneath.
Sure.
And you know, I'm gonna throw in here what we have in schools right now. We do a really good job of being prepared for a crisis situation, such as being from the Midwest. You know, we both, you know, both Darcy and I know about tornadoes. And
Yeah.
so we have tornado drills, fire drills, earthquake drills, intruder on campus drills, all of those drills. But what we didn't have at Sunset Hill, and I don't know if schools have, and I'll be honest, in what I've seen in my extensive travels, and I know Darcy sees in her consulting, and Brian, you can probably say the same thing, is we don't have a system of support for those students who are going through trauma. And one of the things that we share in our book is, you know, you may be a school or a district or even a team of teachers that say to yourself, well, we don't really need that. We're good. And if I may, I want to share a few of those situations really quickly that you'll find in our book, because I think, you know, we have a colleague, and Brian, you know this colleague, Claudia Wheatley, when we were writing the book and when we were talking about the book, of course, extensively, she said really a great question, and that is, she said, we have to ask ourselves as schools, are we ready?
Right.
And so I'm just going to throw out a few.
Sure.
Things like a horrific event, such as a shooting, happens in a neighboring town. And while it may not have, your school hasn't had a suffering of a loss of life, 3 students in the 4th grade class that you have relatives
Yeah. It's a
in
ripple.
that town.
Yeah.
You have a 1st grade student who's been in foster care with the same family since he was 1 year old. His birth mother has recently re-entered the picture, and the court has awarded her custody.
Yep.
And is going to be moving. You have a 5th grader who collapses on the playground. EMTs work on her on the floor of the front office before transporting her, and she later passes away in the emergency room.
Yeah.
You have a 10th grader who has life-threatening diabetes, and you've been told by the parents over the summer that there have been extreme complications and reactions. Another example is you have a family of 3 traumatized children who have entered your district because they have just been fleeing from a war-torn country, and they enroll in your district. And then, you know, quite frankly, what a lot of us, I think, are seeing right now is, you know, we've got a kindergarten student with extreme behavior. And that includes, you know, running into traffic, you know, removing clothes in the classroom, climbing off of bookcases or jumping off of bookcases, climbing on objects. All of these things that I don't think that we immediately equate when we think of crisis or trauma. That's what we're talking about in the book. And if I may, I'm going to go into one more piece, and then I promise I'll stop talking.
No, sure, you're fine.
Is, you know, obviously we did a lot of research through this, and I'm embarrassed to say how much I did not know, right? I was so focused in on my family and my son, that after the fact, and Darcy had said, you know, that that perspective and that thinking back, and that, we used to call it, when I was at Fort Leavenworth, an after action report. You think things and you go through things.
Right.
But when we were digging into the research, one of the, I think, most startling pieces to me was, we now know that 2/3 of our students worldwide are now reporting that they have been a victim of a traumatic event or a crisis event in their life by the time they turn the age of 16.
Wow. Yeah.
2/3. And so I believe strongly that as Darcy and I processed this and thought, can we had to. We just had to. And Darcy has an excellent quote in the book, and she was the one that wrote it, and I'm going to read it just to make sure I say it right. It is incumbent upon us to prepare for the unexpected, because getting it right the first time is too important to leave in the hands of happenstance.
Yeah.
And I think that really sums up through our book what it is we tried to do. Is we've got to get prepared, folks. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And
So,
you may not have a child in your school that has a terminal disease, but you may have a 5th grader whose older sibling, or vice versa. Let's say you have a 9th grader whose 12th grade sister is missing. And the fear is that she has been abducted for human trafficking. What are we going to do?
yeah.
Right?
And I think you two are exactly right. Anybody who has worked in a school knows that there are so many things that are unplanned that just pop up. And there are crises that pop up, but the ones that you talked about, sometimes people say, well, that's never happened here, so we don't really have to worry about it. And the thing is, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail, right? And so I think your book is so important to look at this through a lens of, we have to do this, because even if we don't have to use it, we have a safety net.
Mhm.
Right. And so let's
There.
walk through your book a little bit, because I want to make sure that our audience kind of gets an idea of what it looks like and what's in it. And so kind of walk me through your book, chapter by chapter. The first chapter, getting it right the first time. You talked a little bit about that, but just kind of delve into that a little bit, and then we'll just jump into chapter 2, leading and forming the dynamic problem solving team, because we have to have these people in place to be able to be ready to support not only the person or people who are directly involved, but the people on the periphery, like the other students in the building, the other parents as a part of that community. But kind of talk me through those first 2 chapters, and we'll keep going.
Sure. Darcy, you want to take a stab?
Sure. What I would say is kind of an overarching statement that lets you know how we framed the book, if that's
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course. You're the
it,
experts. I'm just asking the questions. The questions don't get to the heart of it. Say, Brian, we're not going to listen to you. Just talk.
oh,
I mean, you're the
absolutely
expert.
not. Absolutely not. I actually love getting to the practicality of it, and that kind of goes to our overarching our direction, I guess, and the way in which we formatted the book. Because yes, it does have a comprehensive framework. It is boots on the ground, but it is designed for district leaders. It's designed for building leaders. It's designed for teacher teams to assist them in navigating, as we've spoke of, the complexities, right, of the traumas or just the unforeseen events that are so prevalent in our world today.
Yeah.
And it offers, it was really important to Geri and I that this not be it's definitely not a beach read, right?
Yeah.
It is a resource, and that's the reason it says guide on the front, that busy educators can use this book as a blueprint of sorts. And it's got a wealth of practical tools and templates and protocols that can be used comprehensively, the entire system. But it also has a lot of standalone components that possess those qualities that if you already have a system in place, for example, if you already have a data protocol that works for you and your school, by golly, use it, right? But if you don't, one is offered. And so the chapters go step by step, taking you from onset to conclusion, understanding that the onset to conclusion arc may be a week. It may be 5 years, right? Or it may be ongoing. And so we had to develop a system that looked at the child holistically, which that was something that was hugely important and a kind of a light bulb for us. And is nimble enough that you can change it on a dime, and understanding that educators don't have a lot of time in the day. What can we do to embed that flexibility, but yet do it in an equitable manner, right? Because chances are you're not going to have just one kiddo that undergoes something. You're not going to have just one staff member, and you may be juggling multiple plans at a time, as we all do. We all have those systems, and that is one thing that we tried to utilize throughout the course of this book is, for example, the instructional cycle, right? We're all familiar with that. We're educators. But how can we layer that on to the systems that we offer so that it's familiar yet customized, right? To meet those individual needs of the students that are so important to our world.
So that goes to the heart of one of the questions that you asked at the beginning, that you asked yourselves at the beginning of the book, to make sure that we are looking at the needs of each child. And what that question was, how do we ensure that a lens of equity for every situation is foundational to our approach? And that's what you were talking about, Darcy.
Yeah, you know, and I think part of that comes from being trauma informed ourselves. And I think at the beginning of the book, Brian, you had asked about that, you know, that first chapter and getting it right. I think our world has changed, whether you look at it, you know, pre-pandemic, whether you look at it, you know, whatever.
Sure.
Our world is different. I know my social media feed, I can only speak to mine, is flooded with hardworking, dedicated professionals who just are stuck. They don't know what to do when they see behavioral needs, social emotional needs, physical needs on top of the academic needs. And so I think the first thing we have to be able to do is to get trauma informed. And one of the first things we do in the book is discuss that. We offer resources specifically to that. So I think that's really the first thing that every school really needs to do. Don't wait, right? Even if you know, that's starting point one, is to become trauma informed. And
when you say trauma informed, Geri, when you say trauma informed, is that just making sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the idea of trauma? We have common language, we have common knowledge, common expectations, and around this definition of trauma, so we're all on the same page. So we know.
I think it's that. And I think it's, you know, we talk about, you know, regulation, we talk about, you know, being, well, we see a lot of work now, you know, on teacher wellness as well. And I think it's just getting right as a staff. And you mentioned it's the common language, you know, of course, there's the ACEs study out there. If, you know, I've had several colleagues throughout the country who have now, because of what I have shared and what we had shared with them as we wrote the book, they've taken the ACEs study themselves and to see whether they or their kids, you know, have been affected. So
and the ACEs study, for those who you don't know,
sorry, yes,
adverse
go ahead.
childhood experiences, is a study out of the Kaiser Permanente and it measures different adverse experiences that kids have. And if kids have, you can go from 1 to 7 ACEs or 8 ACEs, and some kids come to school and have like 6 or 7 adverse experiences, and that's a lot of stress that's coming into our building.
And one of the things that because I was rereading our book yesterday, getting ready for this and being excited because it just came out and all of that. And in chapter 5, which I know we'll get to, is a pretty weighty chapter. But I think, it links to being trauma informed.
Sure.
And that is, we have to look through the lens of what the child needs now, because who the child is now isn't the same as they were before the trauma.
Yeah.
May not be the same. And so when we talk about being trauma informed, I think it is language. I think it is communication. I think it's all the things that we not only learn about from other studies, but that you learn in the book. And
Sure.
that you realize that you need a team approach, and like Darcy said, all the way through. So I think that's the first step, and I think that's what we really tried to capture, as we began the book.
Sure. So in chapter 1, you just talked about that, again, making sure that you get it right the first time, being trauma informed and making sure everybody's on the same page. And you mentioned that word team. And so in chapter 2, you talk about leading and forming the dynamic problem solving team. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, this can't be all on the back of one person. And, Darcy, at the beginning of our time together, you said, and I'm paraphrasing, but you made the mistake, or you made the mistakes, or it was on you. But it can't be just on the principal. It has to be a collective, collaborative approach to be able to make this work. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the DPST, and Geri and I are very cognizant because we work with schools that are in urban areas that are very big with a lot of resources. We are also Kansas girls who understand what rural communities, where the principal is the cook, is the recess monitor, is all of the things.
And drives a bus.
Yeah.
And so understanding that spectrum of responsibilities and being able to delegate in a manner that is equitable but efficacious, right? And so in order to do that, you have to be able to access systems that are already in place, because time is of the essence. And in the book, we speak of when a trauma occurs, or an unforeseen incident, and somebody comes in, everybody wants to help. We are nurturers, we are educators, and we talk about, the benevolent grapevine and the casserole convoy and all of those things that are helpful and they're wonderful, but we need more, right? And so I talk about the canvas of chaos, right, versus the paint by number, and creating I think we call it a palette of precision. And that's exactly what it's like, because when a trauma happens, especially initially, everybody's like, this will help, this will help, this will help, let's do this. And so how do we harness all of those energies in a productive and positive manner? And in order to do that, you have to have templated protocols, trained people to be able to go battle stations, go to it. And the DPST is that, right? It may be your BLT. It may be a separate team. We talk about qualifiers or positive attributes. We talk about how this team needs to organize the manner in which they're going to move forward. We're all familiar with norms, but it goes above and beyond that as to roles and responsibilities. And we're very descriptive about what that looks like, so that all of those, it's kind of like your first aid kit, right? You got all those things in place. You just have to open the door and then let everybody go to work.
So I'm sorry, because I just want to follow up before I forget this question. But so when you were going through what you were going through, both with Nick, in your school, Darcy, what was what was what did you do right, and what do you think? And again, you wrote the book because of the experience that you had, but what was do you think was lacking um, in that kind of support of Nick or and support of your staff and the community? Was there anything that you think back now and say, this is why this is in the book? Like
Every, yeah,
yeah.
that's how the chapters were designed,
Yeah.
Brian. And every chapter opens with an internal dialogue of what I was thinking. It's almost, I think we called it vignette of me. And it starts out in gray, and those are just, okay, at that point, what was I thinking? And then the rest of the chapter is like, how this could have been done better, right? And here's the thing. I had an incredible staff, and you will, in the book, I am not shy in my emotions about how much I was so lucky to land there. They raised me as a principal, and they were amazing.
Yeah.
I also was a teacher for too long not to know all the things that are on your palette or on your plate. And so to your question, I think I tried to own a lot of it myself, emotionally, and in reflection. I look back and think, I love Nicholas, right? This is going to go away. This is going to be okay, right? And so I just kept thinking it was a temporary thing. It was a temporary thing.
Yeah.
And so I can own that, right? I can grab it. I can carry that extra burden a little bit further. My teachers jumped in 120%. They were there. They were trying to help. But we did not have systems. And if we did have a system, I decided Nicholas's situation was such an anomaly that the system that I had wouldn't work. For example, a student intervention team, right? We all have them.
Sure.
What do you do? I could have tweaked, which is actually what is done in the book later in that chapter 5. I could have tweaked that to make that work. But instead, this was a unique situation, so I decided we needed a unique plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and Darcy and I have talked about, it's not a plug and play.
Sure.
But yet at the same time, it's kind of like we talked about this earlier in the week. We're kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth when we say that, because it's not a plug and play, because having two kids come in from a war-torn country, their needs are vastly different than if, you know, a beloved teacher has just passed away in a car accident.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, those needs are different, but yet it is in the sense of, we knew that, and we see it every day, and we lived it as classroom teachers and principals. If we had said to people, one more thing, here's one more thing,
Yeah.
they would have turned up their nose and said, well, I'll just go on with what I got.
Yeah.
We had to combine, let's go on with what you have.
Sure.
And if you don't have that piece, go ahead and use our ideas, because albeit we did not have a roadmap, I think now, knowing what we lived,
Sure.
we could. You know, one of the things that you asked, Darcy, is what did you not do? And please know that it was nothing that was not done,
Yeah,
because,
that was
you
my
know,
question.
yeah, it was.
My question was actually a question that I knew the answer, because I was leading her into what she did at the beginning of each chapter.
Very good. See,
So
you.
that's why
Yeah.
I wanted her to kind of share what, because she hadn't shared that about the chapters that I had talked about so far. So I wanted to make sure that you talked about that piece and how it led into the chapters.
Yeah.
And poking fun, because Geri and I, this is a tough topic, right? And it was really important to both of us that I think at the end I said, hop on the lily pads where we fell in the pond. And by we, I mean me, paying it forward at this point in our career is super important. And learning from the areas where, for example, understanding that holistically we need to deal with the whole child, but the various facets may have to take precedence at certain times, so with Nick, for example, we had a huge social emotional component. We had academic, physical, but many times his physical needs and supports needed to trump everything else.
Sure.
Well, I was running around like, okay, guys, we can't expect Nick to do his math test today. We can't, if he needs to go to the nurse, all of these things that again need a system, and that's what's offered in chapters basically 5 and 6.
One of the things I think about, and I've been through, some similar situations as a principal and as an educator. I think one of the things I think about is when we have such an event or a situation that takes so much people power. We have other kids who may not be at that DEFCON 5 level, but they're still needing a lot of support. And if we don't have a system in place, then our system actually, it's like trauma. It's like when you have a wound, you want to go and tend to that wound, but you might have a similar wound or a slight wound somewhere else, and that wound doesn't get tended to as much. And so how do you make sure, again, you wrote the book, how do you make sure that people understand that this isn't an add-on, but it's also going to help you support all kids?
So I think that, again, thinking of the process and how we wrote the book, starting with that trauma informed, of course, but then forming that DPST, the dynamic problem solving team, because they are the ones that are the calming force and provide that confident support rather than go and we put it in the book is, we joke around and call it the casserole effect, but really I think when a trauma happens, we go paintball, right?
Yeah.
We just throw it all against and throwing out anything that sticks. And throughout the book, you'll see, a couple of different examples of that. When, like Darcy said, we have to paint by number.
Yeah.
And so once you get into the book, I think that what you find is once you're trauma formed, once you have that team together, and once you get into that data protocol, then what we chose to do was, and we're really excited about chapter 5, because I think it offers something that we hadn't seen out there that would have helped us tremendously. And that's the 4-square focus template. Because and thinking back to Nicholas, there would times that he had behavioral needs in his own way.
Sure.
There would be times when he had social emotional needs, and there would be times, and a lot with him, there would be times when he had physical needs on top of academic needs, right? And so that is where we decided the 4 areas of support could live in those areas, of course, based on your data.
Yeah.
And if I'll just jump into it. And I think what one of the examples of that with Nicholas was he had missed so much school, but he was there that day. He was taking a math test, and he looked down and he had hair on his page. And that obviously is a physical need because the chemo was affecting him. He knew, his teacher knew, so they knew what to do.
That's also an emotional
and he
need
just
too.
what?
It also could be an emotional need because you're
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
not expecting
yeah.
that.
He was Nicholas. You know, he was pretty good, but he
But
knew.
the kids around him, I'm just saying, like, what about
Yeah,
the kids around?
yeah,
It's not just Nicholas. It's like,
exactly.
okay, what about the other kids
Exactly.
who might not be expecting that?
Exactly. But and Darcy was again the one who wrote this part of the book. Is she describes and as a principal, Brian, it's just going to resonate with you. You get a phone call because you've got this great behavior, social, emotional, physical, and academic quadrant set up. We know all of the interventions. We're rocking. You get a phone call and the parent tells you that last night was extraordinarily hard for whatever reason, insert,
Yeah,
and we need to make a change because the child is not going to have the bandwidth to be able to handle these interventions. We're just going to have to focus on this intervention. And so, you know, you find yourself, okay, I'm going to run down and tell the team at 7th grade, the blue team, and they run down and the principal runs down. But in between the time that she leaves her office and the time she gets to the blue team, she's been interrupted 3 times.
yep,
And by the way, there were 2 kids who desperately wanted to show her something. And she just remembered that, you know, and by the time, then what happens, right?
yeah,
And they never get the message. So the entire day is rough for the educators
yeah.
because they're struggling because the kid doesn't have the bandwidth to do what it is that this team, this DPST, has decided that they needed to do.
Yeah.
So, Darcy, I'm going to slide right in because I think this is pretty cool.
So that example may or may not have happened to me. And also thinking broad spectrum, like K-12. I was an elementary principal, but understanding the amount of people you need to communicate with in a high school that touch the lives of that student daily.
Yeah.
And logistically getting to all those people. I'm a visual gal, right? And so color coding is something that is ingrained in most of my systems. Um, and initially, the DPST can determine these quadrants, and these quadrants are color coded. So if Nick has physical needs and social emotional needs, and both of those are on green, that means go. All systems are forward. We're doing the supports. We're leveraging everything that we have to support a kid in those 2 ways. Behaviorally, maybe it's a yellow, right? Maybe we're not touching that right now. And maybe social emotional, which rarely happens, but maybe that doesn't have anything on it. We don't need to do it, but we color code them at the outset to the best of our understanding and ability. But when we get that telephone call, I can, as the principal, go in, or as the delegate who does it, immediately recode those quadrants according to the color that needs to take place or needs to be emphasized, or more importantly, probably de-emphasized that day within the context of these confidentiality, which was huge, right?
Sure.
Setting these groups, mail groups, email groups up previously so that all I have to do is reattach it and send Zoom, right? Send it out, not Zoom, but send it out. And the educators just have to look, they see the color code, and they are immediately communicated with. One of the things that was very important to me, and I'm sure both of you as principals, is we were a team. There was very little hierarchy at
Yeah.
Sunset, right?
Exactly. You're speaking
And
my language. Yeah.
yes. And so my custodian needed to know, my paras needed to know, my kitchen workers needed to know, everybody needed to know certain elements of what pertained to Nicholas's plan earlier. And we kind of, I breezed over it, but we have a template for a communication plan. because that was another thing, Brian, that I underestimated, right? I over communicate. But I didn't recognize the various stakeholder groups. I was so worried about confidentiality. And we discussed how you navigate that with the families and a family liaison in the book, but understanding that the people that need to be communicated with may or may not need certain aspects of the information. It's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And so we talk about how you parse that information out. But again, it's within a system that can just be implemented as time requires. But our color coding thing, to me, golly wallopers, I wish I would have thought of that earlier, because that would have more seamlessly and more equitably allowed me to communicate
All right.
with
You two Midwest women, when you said golly wallabirds,
oh,
I'm like, that's why
Yeah, I have to
I'm like,
admit that I don't know if that one's in my vocabulary, but I'm sure I've said something similar. You know,
I love that color coding because one of the things I heard
fabulous.
Bob Akers say, the best plans could be great, but it's got to be doable.
Right.
Right.
Right. And you know that with the communication tool, with the data collection tool, with the Foursquare template, Foursquare focus template, I think we get down to the heart of what makes interventions really go well in its development. And that is, it's a systematic approach. It's clear, right?
Yeah.
And it helps calm the chaos, because in a crisis situation, whether it is an immediate crisis or, like Darcy said, long term, there's an antsiness, there's a fix-itness. We want to, again, it's that casserole effect. What can I do? And to go from the paintball to the paint by number, you've got to have, communication. You have to have a system in place. And that's what I think all of it leads up to, that Foursquare focus with the color coding. And, again, I think the reason that I like it so very much is it presents it, and it's in its simplicity.
Yeah, it's in its simplicity, and it's also, what makes interventions more effective is, as Mike Matos and Austin Buffum have said, is its targetedness. So those 4 quadrants, when you're saying go, 2 are green, you're truly targeting what they need, and everybody knows.
Because, and
real time.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, in real time.
Yeah.
And as a principal, that's so important. And if I may, Brian, I just wanted to touch on the equity part of it, because it's so important to me.
Yeah.
As a principal, whether you're in a high school or whether you're in an elementary school, similar things happen. And one of the things that and I think one of the reasons I tried to control everything at the beginning, because as you can imagine, people came out of the woodwork, right, to support, and people are wanting to have fundraisers, and they're wanting to make quilts, and all from yes, and all from a
all comes from all comes from here.
And I didn't want to quell any of that, but in the back of my principal hat, right, mind is, but what if this happens to someone else? What if, then how do we make sure that Nicholas was beloved? The family was known. But what about someone else? How do I ensure that they are treated with the same love, respect, effort, keep going, right? And that is so important. And so in organizing this, that was at the forefront of our minds.
Sure.
was how do we create a system that regardless of the situation, regardless of the crisis, unforeseen, be it staff, be it student, young, old, all of that, that it had that capacity, right? To be customized yet systematized,
Sure.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You
To-
want to be able to have a framework, and then you can make it your own depending on the situation, as you had said before.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It,
you know, yeah,
Mm.
I agree. And I'll be frank with you. After we started this book and after doing the research, etc., I have unfortunately seen in some of the places that I have been that inequity.
Yeah.
Because it may be a student who, for whatever reason, pick a reason, right? And you know, in their heart that educators would never do something intentionally like that. But because there's no system
Yeah.
that creates that equity, you know, it happens. And I think also this, and this is a personal thing for me because I've seen so many teachers struggle with they just don't know what to do.
Sure.
This system will help them as well. Can you imagine, you know, being a 10th grade educator who has a student that you have been working with, and you know, the lead on the team or the team itself gets that email, how much more of a release that is
Sure.
to be able to know, and that communication piece is clear, because again, to be clear is kind, right? And so we want to make sure that we're able to, you know, communicate and again, calm the storm.
Sure.
And I think the system does that. So
Hey, are there, available professional development opportunities that complement the themes and strategies in the book?
so you know, and I'll start, and then Darcy join us in. You betcha. First of all, you betcha. We are blessed to have published the book through Solution Tree.
Mhm.
And I know, Brian, you can put up all that information and all of that, but you know, one of the things that I think we tried very intentionally to do is the best books for us as educators are the ones that, if we need the whole thing, we can take it from the very beginning and go through the entire book in
Sure.
a very expedient process. If we need, and so that professional development is there. Darcy and I want to be able to walk teams through the whole thing.
Sure.
But at the same time, the best books for us is, I need, you know, that Foursquare template. I need that Foursquare focus template.
Yeah.
I can grab that chapter, and Darcy and I can work with you on just putting that together, because that, I think, is a huge piece.
Do
Yeah.
you envision, I'm not sure how to frame this question. Do you envision not only K-12, but, and this is kind of random, but colleges using this? Things happen in colleges
And
that
that are unspeakable.
are just unspeakable,
Yeah.
and I don't think they have structure systems in place to support this kind of trauma.
No, I agree. I am privileged and blessed to teach at the collegiate level right now. And um, as with kind of our educational system, we have antiquated systems, right?
Yeah.
That were built long ago, and we know that as educators. And you know, they worked well for a certain period of time, but we've evolved. And being cognizant of our current needs and our current realities, and then our preparedness to to complement
Sure.
those needs is something that I don't think we can undervalue. I think Geri and I both work with districts all the time and are used to looking objectively, kind of, you can't be a prophet in your own land, but
Sure.
looking objectively at great things about districts, strengths and struggles, right? And
Yeah.
being able to identify that and speak honestly to power, right? About what areas might be lacking and how their own current practices can just be amplified so that they do feel confident, they do feel empowered. Um, I think that any type, and Geri led our session with, the tornado drills and
Yeah.
those are things that most likely no student is going to experience. And if they do, we're going to be prepared because we
Right.
practice it every
Right.
month.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
Right.
is something that trauma is so pervasive. I think we can say, unfortunately, every student is going to either be a experience it initially or a secondary result
Sure.
of trauma. So this will benefit all students.
Yeah.
You know, Brian, when you asked that, I immediately went to a different avenue with colleges, and I would love to see a course taught to upcoming educators
That would be great.
on this,
Yeah.
right?
Your book would be the
Because,
course.
yes, because, just like, that's, we hope that college courses are learning about the professional learning community model and the importance of collaboration and data collection and
That's not
intervention.
always the case.
I know. Anyway,
And that's
yeah,
why that your book would
yeah,
be so great for
exactly.
potential teachers, educators, right?
Yeah, because it combines all of that through the DPST and understanding, we have to get really, really good on again, I mentioned it earlier, what the child needs now, not what they needed 2 days before the trauma.
Yeah.
But I really would love to be able, so this is a shout out
Yeah.
to universities and colleges to be able to say, consider it. Because, you've got two very willing participants who have been down this road. And, my dear son Nicholas was what's the word I'm looking for? Inspiration for
Yeah.
all of this. And, and if I may, that's one thing that I think that Sunset Hill was so very, very good at. We're not trying to solve the problem. We're not trying to end the trauma.
Yeah.
And we kind of write about that at the very end because, and we, Nicholas wrote in his book, and we quote it, he never talked about, the future as far as where this is all going to go. And I think that one of the things that Sunset Hill was very cognizant of is they weren't trying to solve it. And I think it's important for educators to realize you're not solving the trauma. You are helping the student and the teachers who work with that student to be able to better help the student learn in whatever fashion the interventions happen to be needed. But you're not solving trauma because that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Hey, we only have a couple minutes left. This has been great. I really appreciate you two coming on. This has been fantastic. An hour's gone by already. Can you
I
believe it?
know. I know. I was looking at the clock thinking, uh-oh.
No, we are great. Darcy, I have one final question, or maybe two. But as Geri said, Nicholas was the inspiration, for this book, and I know he meant a lot to so many people, I mean, around the country, writing the book, having his own podcast, just the positivity and the spirit that he lived. Can you talk a little bit about, your relationship with Nick, but also how he influenced, your community?
Oh, um, so I got to be a guest on Nick's podcast.
I did too.
As did Brian.
Yeah.
And when you see if you've been in education long enough, right, you get to see often the seeds of your effort come to fruition.
Yeah.
With Nicholas, that timeline was artificially shortened, right? But I think that just that podcast, that little guy crammed so much into his short life that I believe on the dedication page, it says, Geri has her, dedication, I have mine. But the bottom one, and I'll probably mess up the verbiage, but basically it said, thanks for teaching us so much more than we ever taught you. And when I wrote that, we actually had it at the end of the book. And we brought it forward because, Brian, I think we go on another hour if I had to tell you everything about Nicholas. But to me, that is a summative statement that reflects my heart and my love for both Nick and Geri.
Both great people. At the end of my podcast, I use this proverb, this old African proverb that I shared at my dad's funeral 4 years ago, and it's, as I go, I am wearing you. And Darcy, you just kind of summed it up. Nick taught us so much, right? And so there's so many people who are wearing Nick. I am wearing Nick because of what he taught me, and just, his positivity and just how he handled a really tough situation. I'm wearing Geri. To now, I met you, Darcy, and I'm wearing you now because I'm going to take what I learned from you and hopefully help other people as well. And so thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Everybody, get the book, Navigating the Unexpected. It's going to be a bestseller, and you two are going to help, not only one school or two districts, you're going to help the world. And that's what Nick did. So thank you all for coming on the show today. I appreciate it. And we'll see you very soon.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Bye-bye. Subscribe to A Conversation with Brian on my YouTube channel and Spotify.